Just a heads up here, I will be talking about the death of an animal, I will be depicting it. Viewer discretion is advised. Trigger warnings and miscellaneous sensibility shields are up. You have been warned. Let me start up by saying that I have a very eclectic set of tastes, and at the risk of sounding like a pretentious fuck with a fedora, a trench coat, an anime t-shirt, and some comfy New Balance shoes, I will say that I enjoy the finer things in life. One moment I'd be watching a delicious slice of life anime or Breaking Bad, the other I'd be reading some French literature or some fine electronic Japanese novel, or I'd be eating some tacos masterfully made by the greatest taco artists of my country, Mexico, or I could also be grinding on some Toho or even some Doom for a change of pace, and on select Sunday evenings I will be enjoying a bullfight. And I can say with certainty, which I hope you believe, that out of all my hedonistic endeavors, the one that can inspire in me the greatest of emotions, pleasures, and to sound even more pretentious, aesthetic enjoyment are bullfights. I wished I knew what kind of conditions made me enjoy what many perceive as one of the greatest sadistic and backward spectacles that still survive on this day and age. Perhaps it's just a saturation of stimuli in form of modern entertainment, think the internet, video games, movies, and a long etc., that made me numb to all things except real violence and brutality. Or is it just in my nature as a man descendant from a culture that in the name of demanding gods wore the skin of their enemies after they tore their beating hearts out of them? Is it just a cultural thing that is ingrained in me? One that is completely incompatible with the US of A to the point of needing to build a magnificent wall to keep bad hombres like me to mingle with the magnificent people of the rodeo. The deep fried butter stick and the clapping. Come on Cletus, I can already see you writing, build a wall. Just so you know it, I actually support the God Emperor himself. Anyways, I have no idea. But what I want to do in this video is at least give you an insider's look at what the hell a bullfight is, and just give you a small introduction to what is actually on the table in terms of ethics. By insider's look, I mean to give you the point of view of, first of all, a Mexican, someone that was born and raised in a land that has had them for at least 500 years, and that possesses the biggest bull ring in the world, an aficionado, meaning a fan, a guy that according to his cap tickets has seen 50 bullfights, meaning a death count of 300 or so bulls, and someone that regularly reads the press on this art form. By no means I am a seasoned expert, I am no matador, no rancher, and I can't even reach the knowledge of say an American writer like Hemingway, a real aficionado. I just hope that this video, with the relative intimacy that YouTube allows, can give you some new information or even convince you of my stance, and make you leave more respectful and tasteful comments on videos of gored matadores and the like. So let's start. First of all, I would like the fighting out of the way. Why? I can certainly see the fight. But for an English-speaking person, bullfighting is quickly associated with other blood sports like dogfighting, fighting, and to some it may even ring to the old bullfights of England. A truly brutal sport that pits dogs against bulls. And far from these mostly horrendous sports, the Spanish-style bullfight is, may I say it, an art form, and the fight is secondary to the performance art that a corrida de toros is. Having said that, let's start before the main event, by the bull itself. The bull, a special breed of your common cattle said to retain most of the aspects of bulls pre-domestication, is bred on extensive ranches all around the world, from the plains of Andalusia to the arid valleys of Mexico to the luscious mountains of Colombia. These bulls have been, for centuries, bred to accentuate certain qualities, above all what we call bravura, that translated in English just means aggressive behavior, and of course stamina, size, and a set of muscles on the neck that gave them this beautiful morrillo on the back of their necks. This morrillo grants them a powerful attack with their horns, with enough strength to carry an armored horse and its rider. They live a life of at least 5 years of roaming and exercise on the wild. They have to at least weigh 460 kilograms, more or less 1,000 pounds. This of course depends on the venue, the plaza, and novillos or young bulls are killed by matadores in the making, novilleros. On a traditional corrida, 6 bulls selected by the rancher arrive at the Plaza de Toros or bull ring. ring, where they are assigned to one of 3 matadores, or toreros, by a raffle before the main event, meaning each torero gets 2 bulls. We then go to the main event, the corrida. The thing starts with the paseillo, a parade of the full cast, led by the guy in charge of the bulls, an authority figure, el alguacilillo, the sheriff, who is charged of overseeing the whole operation and giving the rewards if there are any to give. Toreros follow him, and behind them we have their team or cuadrillas. The picadores on their horses, behind them the monosabios, charged with cleaning and such. And finally, a couple of horses that we carry out of the arena the dead carcass. Each of them salutes the judge, the maximum authority, charged with overseeing the whole thing from above, making sure the rules are followed, and if he sees fit, grants rewards to the toreros. Finally, the thing starts. Usually the torero with the greatest experience and time on the job comes first. He goes into the arena and the judge signals the entrance of a bull that has been named and announced with his stats to the public beforehand. Here we start the first of 3 parts, or tercios, the tercio de varas or third of sticks. The torero will present the bull a usually pink capote, an old remnant of the capes of old costumes. Here, depending on the disposition of the fighters, we will see our first suertes or pases, a series of plays with the cape. There is a whole list of them, and I will not name them all, but they range from practical to spectacular to beautiful. Having done that, the picadores, wielding a spear with a 6 cm dagger, enter on their armored horses. The torero then has to lead the bull with his cape to them so they can do their job. It consists of inserting the spear on the neck of the bull. This is done to break some of their muscles in order to make them humillar or humiliate. This means charging with their heads low. The strength and number of attacks is dictated by the torero in order for him to have a bull ready for the rest of the corrida. Sometimes the bull is only given a superficial wound. Here the public, and the torero of course, can appreciate the strength and aggressiveness of the bull. Usually bulls that hide from the horse and don't charge are sent back. This, of course, is decided by the judge. If he so desires, the torero will perform some suertes with his cape before changing of tercio. We then enter the second third, el tercio de banderillas, where either the torero or his team will attempt to spear the bull with 3 pairs of harpoons. This is meant to enrage the beast that perhaps lost some of his hiding spirit with the horse. Of course, this is also meant to debilitate him. Having done that, we then enter the last third, el tercio de muerte, the third of death. Here the torero will come out with a muleta, the famous red cape, and a dummy sword meant to help him hold the cape. It is on this moment that sets of suertes are presented to the public that will express their satisfaction with a series of instinctive olés. This is not always done. Olé is a passionate scream that expresses the approval of a certain suerte of the muleta. Great works are met with thunderous olés from the whole plaza and standing applause after the end of a set of suertes. Mediocre ones are met with silence, a lukewarm applause at the end of a set, and bad ones with booing, maybe an ironic olé, and silence at the end. These sets are the meat and bone of the whole thing, the core of the whole operation, from the selective breeding to the castigo or punishment that the bull suffered on his usually last afternoon. Here the matador or torero expresses his art. With the sole control of the bull's charge, he expresses his feelings, his personality, and communicates to the public a sense of danger, of the beautiful, of joy, anger, and a myriad of other emotions. If the thing is of my liking, I will find myself, a usually reserved person, getting off my seat, screaming olé, laughing out loud, out of pure joy, even if I was prescribed antidepressants to function, or even letting a couple of tears by the pure beauty of the scene. Rare are the artworks or art forms that get me on the state that a truly masterful corrida can put me. And while I have to admit that not all bulls and not all matadores can put me into that state, it's a gamble that I pay the moment I sit on the hard concrete seats of the Plaza Monumental Mexico almost every Sunday afternoon in a season that usually lasts 3 months every year. And honestly, it is one that I am willing to pay and that I do not regret. Of course, if I ignore all the drama that comes along every public spectacle. Anyways, getting back on track. After his performance, the torero pulls out his sword, his estoque de muerte, and aims for the bull's heart. He stabs the bull, and if it all went well, the whole ordeal ended in 20 minutes tops. Taking more time is severely punished, and the bull is killed elsewhere. If the whole performance was of one's liking, one would pull out a white handkerchief and wave it to signal the judge, that will in turn judge not only based on his appreciation of the whole thing, but also on the quantity of handkerchiefs in the plaza. He will then maybe grant 1 or 2 ears, and on very special cases, the tail of the bull that will be severed from his carcass on the spot to be given to the matador. On other very special occasions, we will have the public standing and flailing the handkerchiefs before the bull is killed in order to save his life and preserve his qualities that are to be passed on to future generations. Here again, the judge will decide the fate of the bull. Though strangely, I've already witnessed 2 forgiven bulls or toros indultados, but I've never seen the bull's tail as a reward. The last thing one will see is the bull's carcass being pulled away by 2 horses, usually on a quick manner, but here again, on some cases and by instructions from the judge, the carcass will be pulled away slowly if the animal excelled, in order to give the spectators a chance of applauding his performance, and on even more special cases, the carcass will be pulled to tour the entire arena once to receive a standing ovation. We will then see the same operation on 5 more bulls. A whole corrida will last, including intermissions and such, approximately 2.5 hours. Well then, having explained the thing in its essentials, we can now speak about the ethical concerns. Of course, I can't really turn down any and all arguments, and even if I could, these disagreements are about essential things that need to be discussed in 1000-page-long philosophical treatises that could never be adapted into a YouTube video done by some weeb. And I am fully aware that I will not really convince anyone of anything that he isn't already convinced of. If I don't agree with you, you will leave a sorely deserved dislike or a nice comment below, calling me a sadist, or in a very extreme case, make me the target of an internet mob. And if I do agree with you, you will leave your thumbs up, a rude comment, or even some indifference, because that is the way the internet works. So let us start. The bull suffers. Any and all caused suffering is morally reprehensible. The ethics behind this were laid out by Australian philosopher Peter Singer on his book Animal Liberation. It's an utilitarian take on our treatment of animals. By utilitarianism, I understand the ethical school that dictates that any and all actions, in order to be deemed or simply be good, must be made in order to maximize pleasure and reduce suffering. Take for example, the random beating of a child. The action is obviously wrong, I am causing suffering on the spot, and the kid will probably be scarred for life. The special thing about Mr. Singer's thesis is that human suffering and pleasure are indistinguishable from the ones of any and all animals capable of them, and if so, our actions towards them must be made in order to reduce the suffering and maximize the pleasure of all living things capable of them, meaning humans and many species of animals. What will I respond in regards to bullfighting? The first obvious response is that the bull doesn't suffer. I don't really think so. I think the animal suffers, but as I pointed out before, it is not the only thing to see in a corrida. Anyways, denying the suffering is not a very effective strategy. If we do it, we are already losing the battle. We accept Mr. Singer's worldview. If anything, we should just, for the sake of argument, think that a corrida is an extremely painful experience for the bull. If we do so, and we still manage to justify a corrida, we will have a more solid foundation. Continuing, utilitarianism is not the sole ethical system that we've laid out, and it is not free of any objections. Actually, bullfighting might be a decent objection. After all, the suffering of one animal is making a whole group of people happy. Isn't the pleasure that we get from him greater than his suffering? How could we even know it? We don't even have a reliable measure of suffering and pleasure. Almost any form of utilitarianism runs into this problem eventually. I mean, sure, there have been attempts to patch it up, but people are still arguing. Is even suffering and pleasure the only things that should come into consideration when making a decision? Don't we consider an inhumane and barbaric thing to do to lynch someone without a trial? I mean, if a mob kills an innocent but is nevertheless satisfied by it just as much as they are after getting the real criminal, aren't we missing something? I'm talking to you on an intuitive level. Don't you feel there is something wrong? If you do, then you're not a hard utilitarian. An example for the weebos. If you ever watch Madomagi, QB the villain is a hard utilitarian. He justifies the suffering of magical girls for the sake of keeping the universe alive. Is QB wrong? I will not answer that. I think he is. I am not a utilitarian. And besides utilitarianism and some vague animal rights theory, there aren't any other philosophical, ethical doctrines that condemn sadism towards animals on a direct way. It is at most secondary. Kicking dogs might be wrong for Kant, because it might promote sadism regardless of species, and by inclusion humans. And this might cause harm to a human, a wrongdoing. Note that the kicking of the dog is not wrong by itself. It is by the virtue of a possible human being being wrong that it is wrong. Just let us take a quick look to the animal rights approach to justifying this statement. And that is to say that animals have rights, something similar as human rights. Now the problem I see with this is that we haven't even reached a nice solid foundation for human rights themselves. Sure, we've been defending human welfare and moral status for millennia, well, at least for some humans. But the introduction of human rights is a relatively new idea, and their defense is still highly controversial. Animal rights are even more controversial, and a systematic approach to them is still very young. The more sound of them involves capacities. For example, if an animal is capable of self-awareness, it has certain rights, and so on and so on. Do bulls have rights? Maybe their capacity of suffering grants them some, but to answer that, let's continue. Then, on the religious side, we have Buddhism, a religion that is grounded on the end of suffering as a goal. But religion is not something that is easily arguable. Some say it is not. Are we going to base our decisions on faith in religion and not in arguments? I leave it to you. This whole talk is to say, these justifications are not the final word on these matters. We are still arguing back and forth to discover the true path of ethics, and we should continue doing so even though we may never stop. Here we reach an impasse. Should we just stop acting until we finally discover this true path of ethics? It's impossible, we can never stop acting. We are living things. Though one path is to just end it all and never even worry about this. But another path is democracy. Go by the will of the many, until we figure shit out. Indeed, this is already done in many countries around the world, where laws to stop or resume bullfighting are discussed and voted. A notable recent case is Colombia, that just got out a recent ban. And let me tell you, Mr. Tree Hugger, I win by a landslide. By just being a little congruent with our actions. Answer me this simple question and I will know on which side you are on this argument. Do you find anything wrong with eating meat? No? Then you are part of the grand majority of humans that should never find anything wrong with bullfighting, but only if we consider the suffering premise. There may be other premises that I am not aware of. The usual retort to this is that the suffering we make cattle go through is justified because with it we are satisfying a basic function, a necessary evil. Oh god, you may be thinking, I am not a sadist. I am not enjoying the death of an animal for spectacle. I am just eating this delicious and juicy Big Mac. But are you really, Mr. Omnivore? It is a very well-known fact that a vegetarian diet is enough to sustain a long and healthy life. You have no need for meat to survive. If you are really convinced by this statement, you are convinced by Mr. Singer and the proponents of animal rights, meaning you should put your tacos right the fuck down. But even if there is a figment of doubt in you, well, you are for bullfighting. If you continue to gobble down that delicious steak while still bitching about bullfighting on these grounds, you are no more than a hypocrite. Especially considering that cattle used for beef lives a life of suffering that I imagine is not even comparable to the 20 minutes of torture ending a life of at least 4 years of pleasure. Now you may be the second kind of human, a vegetarian or vegan. On this case you are far from being a hypocrite, and I hope you are not a dick about it, but then I refer you to the talk about different ethics competing and my democratic decision. Vegetarians, you lose. Most of us find it by some reason or another justifiable to eat meat. We find the suffering of cattle, chicken, fish, and a myriad of other edible animals justifiable for human pleasure. Just to put examples, in the US, 96.7% of the population eats meat. In Spain, the birthplace of bullfighting, 96% of people do so. Of course, we have the really special case of India, where vegetarians might be 40% of the population, and I will admit that a case for banning bullfighting there is stronger, but futile, just because there aren't any bullfights to ban. And by this, by democratic agreement, I think bullfights are justified in the grand majority of the democratic world. Sure, we may have very interesting discussions on the nature of ethics, but as I said, these are fundamentally different worldviews that I can't answer on a YouTube video. This doesn't mean that I want you to like them. I can very well understand a distaste and even complete abhorrence of bullfights, while you find it fine to eat a delicious steak. Just don't be a dick about it and tolerate dissenting opinions and tastes. Your sensibilities are not a valid reason to end the enjoyment of millions of aficionados around the world. But let us see one more argument. A common retort on the part of aficionados when confronted to criticism is: this is culture, this is art. Picasso, Goya, Botero, all were inspired by the corrida. Hemingway and Garcia Lorca loved them. It is clearly art. Are you against art? Against culture? By which the tree hugger will answer: torture is not art. I am not against art, but bullfighting is not art. It is torture and suffering of a defenseless animal. The retort is so common that we even have nice posters, shirts and mugs saying torture is neither art nor culture, because fashion trends and capitalism and so on and so on. Here, even though I stand on the side of the aficionado, I really think this talk of culture and art is irrelevant. And if tree huggers take the bait to the point of making it a slogan, it is only further proof of their idiocy, but I digress. First of all, in my description, I think I made a relatively solid case for bullfighting as an art form. Let us quickly define art, something that primarily expresses the intentional feelings of his author. I think it works for what most of us consider art, from the Sixtine Chapel to some of the most avant-garde art that everybody hates. How does bullfighting convey intentional feelings? If the thing was pure torture and sadism, I think the styles and personalities of the matadores might not be as notable as they are. Bullfighting resembles interpretive dance or any other performance art. Just to contrast two artists, Julián López el Juli and Morante de la Puebla, two recognized figuras. El Juli is what I would call a spectacular special effects matador. Let us only look at his trademark move when he kills, el Julipié. It's basically a variation of the usual volapié, the most common way to kill, but he jumps while completely covering the bull's head. This makes the whole thing less dangerous while still seeming dangerous and spectacular. This is not something that I like, but it is something that El Juli has devoted his entire life to perfect in every part of the corrida, and he has succeeded. He is a beloved torero known for his, I'd argue, simulated bravery and spectacle, and he can get oles from almost every bull he confronts. He may not perform an art that I personally like, but that doesn't mean he is not an artist. Now compare him with Morante de la Puebla, equally known and respected. He doesn't have a special move like El Juli does, and he mostly follows tradition, but by doing so he conveys the pure beauty of the thing. He excels at temple, meaning steadiness. In a given charge of the bull, he will maintain the muleta at a constant speed, controlling the charging beast, dominating it. Like a painter might use a fan brush to paint happy little mountains, or a poet might use a metaphor. Morante might use his eternal derechazos, dominating the technique to express himself, pure artistry. Though in bullfighting there aren't any happy little accidents. Imagine if Mr. Ross ended in the hospital every time he made a mistake. Just to close this, I could say that Hemingway uses the word art and artist quite frequently on his book, but I'd be appealing to authority. I just want to point out that even an American can see the art in this. But what have I won with explaining that a corrida is art? Nothing. If a corrida is a morally bankrupt thing, it doesn't change the fact that it is art. What I want to say here is that we must distinguish between aesthetics and ethics, to distinguish what action is good, between what piece of art is good. Just consider a famous case, the one of Mr. Vincent. The guy lived an existence of misery and poverty, and I think we would agree that he wouldn't have painted what he painted otherwise. If we could have stopped his depression and general poor mental health, I think we should have done it. It would be the good thing, in a moral sense, to do. But does this give any less or more aesthetic qualities to his work? I think they don't. Our aesthetic judgment is different from our moral judgment, and they should be kept apart. What underlies the exchange about art and torture between our animal lovers and the aficionados is the idea that art is something to be protected at all costs, that art is above morals, that something is free of any moral questioning if it is art. If this were the case, I think the aficionado wins, being a counterproductive thing for the animal lover, who can't really prove that a corrida is not art, simply dismissing it because it involves suffering. If he did, he should also accept that Vincent's art is not art, on the grounds that his creation involves real human suffering. Are they ready to ban any and all art that involves suffering of some kind? I interpret their flailing of signs torture is not art as a yes, and I think most of us will be disgusted by such a ban. It is what happens when we don't distinguish between aesthetics and ethics. Oh, but let us dump a fallacy out here, because this is YouTube. You know who else bans art by their ethics standards, mixing aesthetics and ethics? Inshallah. I didn't just say this because I want to compare radical Islamism with the righteous cause of a world without animal suffering, although eco-terrorism is a real thing. I only wanted to point out what this kind of arguments lead us to. So to aficionados and ecologic jihadists alike, stop it with the art argument, discuss the matter at hand, ethics. We may say the same with the whole protect our traditions nonsense. Traditions are not untouchable, let us discuss real ethics. Anyways, I hope I gave you an interesting first and introductory look at this whole world. I just felt a need to make a video in English on the subject because most of what we have is completely biased on the abolishment side. If you care about this, I hope you took both positions in consideration. Animal activism and a general hypersensitivity towards animal suffering is taking a hold of the internet. I know it might just be a vocal minority, but even when watching funny cat videos, I see very stupid comments of false compassion for a cat that is not really suffering, and comments wishing the death of matadores when they get gored really disgust me, as I am sure many people are just as disgusted by my hobby, but hey, at least you heard a dissenting opinion over here. Thanks for watching. For once I will be saying this honestly on YouTube. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I will really be interested. And also, this is kind of an experiment. If it is well received, I might just do another video on the subject. On my Spanish speaking channel, I focus on anime and its culture out of all things. Just subscribe if you find my way of treating the subject interesting. I will continue doing it for you. Thanks again very much for watching. Adios.